woman's perspective. My name is Jules Dunham Howie, and I'm pleased to be your host. Our co-host, Margaret Locklear, is unfortunately not able to be with us today, but she'll be back with us very soon. I have an illustrious panel with me this morning. I'm going to ask these wonderful women to introduce themselves and share with you a little bit about who they are. Start us off, Lenore.
My name is Lenore Dawson, and I am running for Clerk of the Circuit Court, Baltimore City, and I'm also an Emerge Maryland graduate.
My name is Lisa Rodvian. I'm a public school teacher and a former education law attorney, and I am running for Anne Arundel County Council, District 6, which covers the Annapolis area, and up to Crownsville and down the peninsula.
Hi, my name is Brooke Learman. I'm a civil rights attorney, a mom, and currently a state delegate in District 46, Baltimore City. I'm also running for re-election.
Hi, my name is Tasha Uday. I am an actress and a graduate from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County.
All right, wonderful. Well, ladies, we're going to jump right into our first topic this morning, and that is about the Starbucks store in Philadelphia. The manager of the Philadelphia Starbucks called police on two black men who asked to use the restroom without ordering anything from the restaurant. Should the Starbucks manager have called the police? What do you think?
Seemed, certainly I wasn't there, but from all accounts, it seemed pretty outrageous. I think they weren't doing anything. It seemed very problematic. That certainly was not something it seemed like they needed to call the police for. Definitely a lot of concerns about what happened at that Starbucks that afternoon. Yeah.
It definitely seems like we have a habit of escalating things when there are smaller steps. If there were really concerns, there are so many ways that the manager could have addressed concerns that didn't involve the police and probably would have avoided everything that happened, including the arrest, and would have led to a much more reasonable resolution.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that we need to start having a broader conversation about this, because we have a tendency to deal with situations and incidents and not the underlying issue.
Totally.
And here, the underlying issue is implicit and unconscious bias.
Mm-hmm.
And we have seen this time and time again. And I think unless we have real conversations about it, become self-aware, we start to identify the fact that we actually are dealing with this implicit bias. And there are actually tools you can use to measure whether or not you're dealing with it. And we have to also start to be more proximal with people of diverse groups or with people that are different from us, because without that proximity, we have a tendency to not be able to relate to people, and or the other issue is the narrative that is often promoted in the United States in terms of how we see people of color.
Right. Yeah.
I definitely agree on all accounts. I think that we need to be more conscious about the way we treat people. Emotional correctness is definitely missing here in the situation. As an employer, as a worker, we have to treat the customers as well as just human beings with more respect and be able to de-escalate a situation. This is your place of business, and we need to remember something like that. And it definitely is unconscious, and we need to continue to look at ourselves and how we treat people, because things will be taken in the wrong manner all the time, like we just did right now.
Yeah. I mean, I think you all raised really good. The unconscious bias issue, it permeates so much. This implicit bias, it permeates so much of where we are right now as a society. And when I first heard about that, my first reaction was, he couldn't, the manager couldn't have just talked to the guys and said, what, I don't understand. Like, why couldn't you just talk to them and said, hey, what's going on? It's, the ability to build relationships with people of different races, but also this unconscious bias, we see it permeates in so much, for instance, in our schools, and how children are dealt with in discipline. And the over-disciplining of children of color and children of disabilities too, but predominantly young African American boys. That we are seeing them be suspended and expelled at much higher rates. In Maryland, that was something that we noticed last year in 2017 in the legislature, and we actually passed a bill prohibiting suspension and expulsion of students in pre-K to second grade, because thousands of kids
Mhm.
who are 5 who are being suspended and expelled. You know, it sets them up for a lifetime
Yes.
of hating school,
Yeah.
not trusting people, doubting themselves, and it was, you know, so much about unconscious bias or implicit bias and race. So, you know, we have to be able to deal with this.
And it's good that you actually took that step. And what I really appreciated, I want to share with you what the Starbucks CEO said. Kevin Johnson told ABC News that this was completely inappropriate for the Starbucks employee to call the police. Clearly, this is an opportunity for us to provide clarity, and in addition to that, I'd say there's training, more training that we're going to do with our store managers, not only around the guidelines, but training around unconscious bias. And that, to me, is a CEO taking responsibility.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's good.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think that's a really, really important first step to realize that this is something that's going on and needs to be addressed. I'm really concerned about how much can be accomplished in a one-day training. My understanding is that the stores will be closed for one day for all employees to be trained, and I think that is a wonderful first step. I hope it is not the only step, because I think this can take, you know, months, if not years, of self-reflection to realize. You know, I've always thought of myself as a person who was open-minded and, you know, treated people of different backgrounds fairly and equally. And I recently went through a training, an excellent training that was facilitated by Robin DiAngelo, who's an expert on this subject. And even after all of the self-reflection I had already done, I found new places that I needed to dig deeper and understand. And so I hope that that is something we can find more opportunities to bring into our communities, not just at Starbucks, but especially you know, public officials or public servants that work with work with very diverse communities and need to be able to really understand what their biases may be telling them.
Well, I think, as you said, the first step is great, which is accountability. Because if we don't have accountability, behavior does not change. And we see that in many aspects of our society. In terms of training, I don't think a one-day training is going to work because there's something called the implicit association test that measures implicit bias. And I think that this is a tool that should be used, number one. I think there should be an ongoing training, but also leadership sets the tone and the culture for an organization. So if you have someone in a position of leadership who is very self-aware, who is at a level of consciousness where they understand what's right and just doing the right thing, and also is willing to be bold enough to say, hey, this is an issue, which the CEO admitted, but this is the ongoing plan in order to deal with this, because a lot of these biases, these are so systemic and they run so deep, and people really are not aware of them. So, you know, it's work to be done, and we need to be willing to do the work.
I think at the same time, you have to agree, some people can take, the first step is definitely a good idea, but at the end of the day, no matter how many times you have classes, some people are just going to be stuck in their ways, and it may not be just unconscious. Maybe this person is just feeling more and more comfortable with expressing the way they feel. Since in politics right now these days, what's going on, people are definitely feeling more comfortable to be biased. And we definitely look more at different values of our workers that we hired because it's happening.
Well, do you think that's a little beyond bias? Because if you're very conscious, it's not so much of an implicit bias as it is just a prejudice.
That's true.
So I think those are two different things, and I do think that, you know, with the climate of the country, people are feeling very emboldened in terms of expressing how they really feel.
Indeed. Well, ladies, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back from the break. Let's move to our second topic, sexual harassment and law enforcement. Sexual misconduct persists during traffic stops, ride-alongs, and even mentorship programs. Research on police sexual misconduct, which is a term used to describe the actions from sexual harassment and extortion to forcible rape by officers. Research overwhelmingly concludes that it is a systemic problem. In 2015, an investigation by the Buffalo News, based on a national review of media reports and court records over a 10-year period, concluded that an officer is accused of an act of sexual misconduct at least every 5 days. The vast majority of incidents, the report found, involve motorists, young people in job shadowing programs, students, victims of violence, and informants. In more than 60% of the cases reviewed, an officer was convicted of a crime or faced other serious consequences. The question is, what are the ways that we educate the community on this pervasive issue that I think people don't really know about?
Yeah. It's a great question. Sorry, I just jumped in.
That's what we want.
Yeah.
You're at the table.
Right, I'm at the table. So it's a great question. I first learned about this issue when reading the Department of Justice report on the Baltimore Police Department, and reading about some of the incidents that were happening, rape, sexual harassment, extortion, and then I became very concerned. And then this past winter or fall, read an interesting news account about a woman in New York, actually, who was picked up by 2 officers for a petty crime, something like possession of marijuana or something, and then they raped her after they took her into custody. Well, she then claimed rape. There was evidence that, their DNA evidence was there. She had a rape test, and they claimed that consent. They said, no, it was consensual, even though she was in custody. So, this is the idea that you could ever give consent in custody is just insane. There is no consent when you're in custody. So we were able to act really quickly here in Maryland, because it turned out Maryland didn't have a law protecting people in custody. And so I introduced a bill that we passed to basically create strict liability, a strict liability criminal offense. So if you're a police officer, it is now illegal and punishable by jail time to have sex with somebody in your custody.
Wonderful.
There's more to do. We got to educate the community. There's a lot more to do. We got to protect victims and whatnot. But I think that was an important first step. And in terms of educating community, it was interesting that so many people didn't know it wasn't a law, right?
Yeah,
Because it seems like common sense.
Boggles my mind
Yeah.
that wouldn't be something that
Right.
is, I guess, you should know, but apparently you need to actually have laws.
I know.
Because people
Right.
in law enforcement or authority, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and this is just an example of this.
Exactly.
People, a lot of law enforcement think
Yeah.
that they can do whatever they want, and
Yeah.
this shows that he could. But this law definitely is the first step to making sure that this does not happen again, and
Yeah.
the number decreases.
I hope.
I just want to applaud Brooke for the
Yes.
work that you did.
Absolutely.
This was not an
Absolutely.
issue on my radar. I
It's
think,
crazy. Yeah.
especially being from a community that doesn't have as much interaction with law enforcement, I'm maybe less likely to have encountered it, but I'm so glad you brought this to light and took this very important first step, because it was, when I first learned about this, it was really mind-boggling to think that it was even allowed for an officer to be engaging in sexual conduct during their work hours, on whatever scale, that there should be some sort of possibility of consent when there's such a power dynamic that leaves the person that is the victim at a huge disadvantage, or maybe a complete disadvantage.
Yeah.
So I'm very grateful that you brought this to attention, and Marylanders are now have this first step of protection, or this first measure of protection.
Yes. I am also excited about the legislation that passed. I think it's important because, if we were to engage in sexual activity during working hours, we would be terminated immediately.
That's true.
That's just unacceptable. And having law enforcement officers in a position of power A lot of times, people who are interacting with law enforcement are in a place of fear, even if you're pulled up for a traffic stop. And we have heard stories about sexual favors to release people. So I think that I'm really excited about this law, because we can call it a law now, not a bill. I'm really excited that we are hopefully moving forward in Maryland in terms of dealing with a lot of systemic issues, especially with the police department.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would
So
al-
thank you.
Yeah, definitely. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I would want to know what the numbers are compared to female law enforcement compared to men, because we can't just say it's only men doing this, because as women, we have to know we're not innocent either. I'm curious about the numbers.
I haven't seen any incidents of women law enforcement. That doesn't mean it's not out there. This
Yeah.
isn't something that's reported widely, you
Yeah.
know, so, but I haven't seen any of that yet.
And not being reported widely, I think that's really the critical piece here, because now that the law is on the books, there's got to be a concerted education campaign
Right.
that starts from the grassroots to actually help community understand you now have something to back you up.
Right.
Before, you just had your voice, and your voice was silenced by power. And so now you actually have a law that can come and help you. So what are some of the ways that you're thinking about being able to get the word out to help the community understand now you actually have some teeth here?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think some of the organizations that I've been working with and that I worked with on this bill, like the Power Inside, Women's Law Center, some of the groups that work with sex workers, that it's important to educate a lot of the groups out there that might come across some of these women who are more prone to having this happen, to make sure that they know, so that they can pass this information on, that they're educated. Also important for, the lawyers who are doing this work and working with people, the public defenders and prosecutors, that they understand that, you no longer have to go through a lengthy trial and prove lack of consent and rape. There's a law in the books now, that'll say, hey, there's a DNA test, let's do a rape kit, let's get the DNA test, that's it, period, that proves the point. So, I think that's important. But you're good point, lots of education to do.
So that's really good that you're finding the organizations that are talking to these people firsthand. What do you think are some other ways that we can actually get this word out about this new law?
I think social media is a great tool, especially for millennials that love social media. And you get to reach thousands of people just at the click of a button. So I think just making it available and making people aware, having conversations with people, educating young people when they go to community events. So I think probably outside of social media, connecting with community organizations is the fastest way to kind of get it out there, because we don't know. We know that there is an issue with people who are dealing with what are called sex workers, or people who are victims of human trafficking. We know that that's an issue, but we don't know how many actual women have been pulled over for a traffic stop and they've been asked for sexual favors. So, because most often when people are victimized, they're silent. They don't discuss this. So I think to just have a broad approach in terms of disseminating information is a good idea.
Good. We got to come up with a hashtag. The hashtag, see something, say something. We got to come up with a hashtag, about this that gets it out there. I mean, What do you think? Anything, Lisa? Any ways we can get the word out?
Well, I think one of the fortunate things that we're seeing right now is we're in a climate, because of things that have happened nationally, where I think women are feeling more empowered than they have in a very long time to speak up.
Indeed.
So once we can get the message out that this is indeed something you should speak up about, I think this can be part of that same wave, part of the Me Too wave. But there's definitely a long way to go. Possibly educating students when they're still in high school, maybe in a high school health class, that, when you're talking about all kinds of, issues related to sexual health, that this could be part of the conversation, that it's put into school curriculum and say, this is a fact you need to know. This is a law that protects you in this state.
Wonderful ideas, ladies. This is phenomenal. We are pressing in on a critical topic. Well, it's time to take a break, and we'll be right back. discuss this morning. A 17-year-old says that she was told to put Band-Aids on her breast after school officials claimed she was distracting male students. Now, y'all have to hear this story. So, officials at a high school in Florida reportedly pulled a teenage girl out of class last week after a teacher claimed her nipples were distracting male students. Student Lizzie Martinez said she recently went to school braless because she had a sunburn and did not want her shoulders to be further irritated by bra straps. We can relate. She wore a gray long sleeve shirt and she was in school. But before the school day was over, she was pulled out of her 5th period class and sent to the dean's office. The dean told Martinez that one of her teachers was concerned that her breasts and nipples were distracting male students after hearing a boy laugh at her and tell his friends that she wasn't wearing a bra. The dean then instructed Martinez to put on a second shirt, stand up, and jump around to see how much her breasts moved. Martinez was taken to the nurse's office and asked to cover up each of her nipples with 2 Band-Aids. She later took to Twitter and spoke about the incident. She tweeted, "My school basically told me that boys' education is far more important than mine, and I should be ashamed of my body." The school district says the student violated its dress code policy. What say ye, ladies?
I think this is just a clear case telling us how far we still have to go. We have made great strides for women in many situations, in many scenarios, but there is still work to be done. There's problems with this at so many levels. I think I'm most appalled by the teacher's reaction in having her stand up in the middle of class. I hope that teacher is no longer employed. I can't imagine that that teacher should be in a classroom serving as any sort of role model. So,
And that's just like sexual harassment in and of itself. How are you telling an underage girl to jump? Let me see how much they move. That's definitely an inappropriate situation, and I feel it's very dramatic. It's
Yeah.
Yes.
Your dean is like checking out your breasts to see if they move up and down.
And why is the teacher even looking at you that much? If these boys say they, boys are jerks, kids are jerks, but if no one else is really having an issue, I do understand how it could be, depending on how, large she is, it could be distracting, but that's a really delicate conversation that you should have with a young lady, and it was very inappropriate, and they should be suing the school for the traumatic treatment that the little girl got. She's a little girl. She's 17. She isn't a grown woman. She's a baby.
I mean, I also have to say, when I first heard about this, I was like, what was she wearing, So I went online and looked. It was a full, up to here, t-shirt, dark gray, long sleeve, the most conservative thing that she possibly could have been wearing. It's not like this was like a low cut, her breasts were hanging. I mean, it was like, it's incredible. I cannot believe a dean made her jump up and down to show him her breasts and how much they moved. I mean, I don't know how this could have been handled.
They do it in
Worse,
prison, right?
Yeah,
They
it's
do it in prison.
crazy. Yeah.
Well, I am really saddened by the trauma that this young lady suffered, because we have to call it what it is.
Yes.
Also, I think we need to talk about how women are often made to be responsible about the behaviors or for the behaviors of men and boys.
Right.
Because it is the responsibility of the young men to act like young men and present themselves that way. And we cannot be responsible for your hormones. That's your responsibility. And I think oftentimes that blame is shifted because we see that in every aspect, from sexual harassment. She wore a short skirt, or she made me feel aroused, or all the way to sexual abuse. So, blaming the victim. And I think here, again, we're blaming the victim. And the young lady, as Brooke said, made a conscious effort to cover herself, knowing that this, could be an issue. And to be treated like that is just very, very disheartening. And I think that there need to be conversations about how we are actually rearing our young men and boys to see young girls and
I
women.
agree.
We really have to start to address that issue.
I agree. I think that last point too is like, you know, that we are setting these expectations for men, for young boys, to say like, oh, it's, if you don't like how somebody looks or how somebody's dressed, it's okay to just complain and it'll be handled for you. Not like, this is on you. Everybody looks different, right?
Yes.
People dress differently, and you need to be responsible for your actions and your eyes. You know, I
Yes.
mean, like, yeah, it's pretty, you know, and you know, if you're the parents of that boy, you should, you know, I hope that those parents can, you know, work with him to say, hey, you know, you need to be responsible too for your actions and your eyes. You know, I just, yeah, it's a real missed opportunity to do some, to handle this a lot better.
Yeah.
And I hope they learn.
But
Yeah.
that's actually to be the question, you know, how do we think this situation could have been handled differently? We are women, so we have a different perspective, and we should be able to give a different perspective about how we think that this situation should have been handled. What would you have done if you had that experience?
Can I cut you for 1 second, because we have 2 minutes, and I think you haven't said so much, Lisa. What I think, now you don't have to say this, but why did they not take the young men aside and have a discussion with him?
Exactly.
Right.
Why are they taking the girl?
Right.
Because
Right.
the word, so I think that should be put out there, and since you haven't, would you like to say?
Sure,
All right,
absolutely.
and action on Lisa?
Well, I think one of the very important questions here is why is the attention so much focused on the young lady? You know, she was there in her class, you know, trying to do her part, getting her education and trying to deal with a sunburn in the best way she could. But you have these young men who are giggling and laughing, and actually really aren't they the ones causing the disruption? And why aren't we, you know, addressing them? I'm worried that there is a whole cultural shift around this. As a school teacher, this issue is starting to come. This is the time of year when tank tops and shorts and everything come out. And I think many female teachers have, you know, grown up in this environment where they were body shamed themselves and are now in a position to enforce these same rules that they were subject to on young women. So I think there's a huge conversation that needs to happen in order to make progress here with both female and male teachers.
Excellent, excellent point. And so we're going to have to continue that conversation at another time when we can really delve deep and really, I would like us to be able to help them have some alternative ideas. I don't want us to leave this story, though, without knowing that the school district, the superintendent did come back and say he thought it was handled inappropriately and that they are working at a district level to figure out how they can address these types of issues more appropriately. So, well, ladies, believe it or not, our time has come to an end. It just goes so quickly when you have great conversation. So our time has come to an end, and I just want to say thank you so much for giving us your time today and sharing with us your views. It's been a pleasure to have you, Tasha, Brooke, Lisa, and Lenora. We look forward to seeing you again at a place at the table where you know your voice can always be heard. Take care.